What if a single lie about your pension, saying you get $1,200 a month when it's really $5,000, set off a chain reaction that shattered your entire family? Dorothy Bennett thought hiding the truth would protect her, but her daughter-in-law had already set her sights on every dollar. As forged signatures, missing money, and buried secrets rise to the surface, Dorothy must fight for her dignity, her home, and the family she once knew. When trust is broken and $3,800 a month vanishes into someone else's hands, how far would you go to take your life back? In a house built on silence and sacrifice, can one woman's courage expose the truth before everything she loves is lost? If I had to name the day my life started to unravel, I'd choose the Wednesday in late November when the rain hit the house in sheets, turning the world outside to a gray watercolor blur. My hands shook as I opened the faded bank statement that had arrived in the morning mail. Just my name and the bank's address. The envelope limp from the wet. I stood at the kitchen window, watching water run in rivulets down the glass, the sky so heavy it pressed on the roof. My fingers trembled as I peeled open the seal, the paper soft as old tissue. Inside, the numbers stared back at me. $5,000 every month. That pension was my safety net. My quiet victory after 33 years of shelving books and answering questions in the local library. It was supposed to mean security. Instead, the sight of it filled me with something closer to dread. I set the statement on the counter, breathing out slowly, trying to still my hands. I'd always prided myself on being steady, the sort of woman who never made a fuss. Lately, I felt myself growing smaller, shrinking into the corners of my own life. I could feel the house around me changing too. Once filled with laughter and the warm mess of family, now tidier, colder, more like a museum of who we'd once been. My phone rang. I didn't have to check the caller ID to know it was Lila. She called every month, always polite, always direct. I braced myself before picking up. Hello? My voice sounded thin, almost tentative. Dorothy, hi, it's Lila. Her tone was clipped, efficient. Just touching base about the bills for December, Eric and I were wondering what your pension deposit will be this month. I know you said before, but I want to be sure the budget lines up. I looked down at the statement again, the numbers burning my eyes. I knew why she wanted to know. Every time I gave an exact figure, a new, unexpected expense would appear. Repairs to the gutters, contributions to Sophie's school fund, extra for the grocery budget. Lila never said we need it. She made it sound like we were all doing our part. But since Eric's father died, I'd felt my boundaries eroding, my home and money gradually absorbed into Lila's realm of practicality. I hesitated, watching rain trace patterns on the glass. Lila didn't fill the silence. She waited, always so patient, so sure I'd fold. It's still just $1,200, Lila. Nothing's changed. The words tasted foreign, brittle as bone. There was a pause, long enough that I wondered if she'd caught the tremor in my voice. Okay. Thanks, Dorothy. I'll let Eric know. We just want to make sure everything's fair. The call ended. I stood with the phone pressed to my ear, pulse pounding, the lie echoing in the hush that followed. I hadn't meant to say it, but I'd seen the way Lila moved through this house, always rearranging, always correcting. I'd seen her at family dinners, giving Eric that quick glance when I reached for the serving spoon, or the way she'd adjust the napkins I'd already folded. There was never an argument, not directly, just small corrections, gentle reminders, little acts that wore me down until I was barely present at my own table. I felt guilty almost immediately, but under that guilt, something like relief. I turned from the window and looked at the mantel, lined with faded photos, a life's worth of birthdays and graduations, Eric grinning with Sophie on his lap, Paige's wild curls in every frame. And there I was, always off to one side, always the one holding the camera or the tray. How did I become invisible in my own home? Maybe it started long before Lila, before even Eric was born. Maybe I'd been taught, by my own mother, to make myself useful, not important. But lately, it felt like the walls were closing in. Like every decision in the house belonged to Lila. Every conversation filtered through her needs. I picked up the bank statement again. The number was the same, but my certainty was gone. I told myself it was a harmless lie, a small thing to protect what was mine. But I'd lived long enough to know that small things grow sharp when left in the dark. I wandered through the house, running my hand over the old oak banister, the wood worn smooth by years of children's hands and heavy footsteps. The kitchen clock ticked on, oblivious. I found myself standing in the dining room, staring at the places we used to fill on holidays, now too quiet, too careful. I remembered the last Thanksgiving, the awkward silences, the way Lila smiled when she wanted something changed, the way Eric stared at his plate. I'd tried to keep the peace, but peace had become just another word for silence. Sometimes the smallest lies echo the loudest. I said the words aloud, soft but sharp. They hung in the air, as real as the scent of old coffee and the sound of rain against the glass. I didn't know what this lie would cost. I didn't know how long I could keep it. I only knew that I was tired. Tired of feeling like a guest in the house I'd built. Tired of being practical. Tired of folding myself into corners so someone else could feel in control. The rain showed no signs of letting up. Outside, the yard blurred into a palette of grays. Inside, I pressed my hand to the mantel, touching the glass of each frame, as if I could press myself back into those memories, when my word meant something, when my voice was part of the family's music. But things were changing. I could feel it in my bones, the way a storm warns old joints. The truth was still there, heavy in my chest. The lie was only the beginning. I knew that much. And as I turned off the kitchen light, I wondered how many more lies I'd have to tell before I could finally claim something for myself. Looking back, it's easy to see how the roots of all this trouble burrowed deep and early, long before the pension, before the phone call, before the lie that would change everything. If the present was rain and caution, the past was a patchwork of warmth, pride, and unspoken tension, stitched through with moments I wish I could relive or undo. Eric was always my golden boy, bright and gentle from the start, his father's steady gaze and my soft hands guiding him. My late husband, David, had a patience I envied, always letting Eric try, stumble, try again. The house echoed with their laughter, weekend projects, Eric's voice drifting from the kitchen to the den, asking questions only his dad could answer. Back then, I thought family was something you could simply build brick by brick. And as long as you kept the windows open and the soup simmering, the good would outweigh the bad. But after David died, the house shrank. The shadows grew longer, the rooms colder. Eric drifted, first into his work, then, inevitably, into Lila's orbit. I met her on a brittle March afternoon. She wore an expensive coat and a perfect smile, her handshake businesslike, her eyes always calculating. Eric's posture was different when he stood beside her. Proud, but uneasy. I remember that first dinner. Lila commented on the table setting, asking if I'd always mixed patterns or if I'd simply run out of matching plates. It was meant to be funny, I think, but I felt the old china rattle beneath her gaze. It didn't take long before the subject of money crept in. Soft at first, then sharp. Lila had ideas about budgets, about investments, about what made sense for the family. She brought spreadsheets, plans, and a certain polite impatience for the messiness of grief. At David's memorial, she took over the kitchen, ordering Eric to move platters and telling Paige where to store the extra casseroles. I tried to be grateful, but each gesture felt like a quiet eviction. Eric, always the peacekeeper, went along. "She's just trying to help, Mom," he'd say, eyes tired. "She means well." He never liked confrontation. I suspect he learned that from watching me defer to David, smoothing every rough edge in the name of harmony. But the more I watched Eric bend, the more I feared what would happen if he ever snapped. Paige was different. She was the thunder to Eric's gentle rain, outspoken, restless, and fiercely loyal. After her father's funeral, she moved back into her old bedroom for a few months, insisting she wouldn't let Mom get steamrolled. Paige never did trust Lila. "There's something off about her, Mom," she'd say, voice low, eyeing Lila from behind a book. "She cares too much about appearances. She wants to run this house." It was a strange, divided time. Paige camped in her childhood room, Lila taking over the living room with catalogs and color swatches, Eric caught in the crossfire. I tried to find my footing, but every step felt like trespassing in my own home. Lila's mother, Judith, made everything worse. Judith had the air of someone born into privilege and disappointment. She visited often, usually unannounced, and immediately found fault with our house. Too small, too cluttered, too quaint. I once overheard her telling Lila, "Your husband's family means well, but they're set in their ways. You'll have to be patient, dear. You're making improvements, and that's bound to ruffle feathers." Lila listened, chin up, nodding as if the world owed her every advantage. Whenever Judith visited, I felt erased. Just the housekeeper, not the mother. Paige hated her visits most of all, muttering sarcastic asides and disappearing for hours with friends. The real turning point came 6 months after David's death. Lila and Eric announced they would be moving in for a while, to help me adjust. That's when the house began to change in ways that felt irreversible. Lila started redecorating. New curtains, new paint, family photos rearranged. My favorite armchair disappeared to make space for a reading nook I never used. She insisted it was all for my comfort, but it felt like slow erasure. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find Lila crouched with swatches and floor plans spread across the rug. She smiled without looking up. "I hope you understand, Dorothy. We have to be practical now. Things change. You'll see. It's for the best." I nodded, but resentment settled in my chest like a stone. I tried to adapt, to find gratitude in small things. Eric's gentle jokes, Sophie's hugs, even the rhythm of chores. But with every decision Lila made, about bills, about what was practical, I felt myself fading. Meals became more formal, as if Judith might drop by at any moment. Lila even organized a family meeting to review expenses, presenting charts and graphs like it was a boardroom, not my kitchen. I listened to her list utilities, groceries, miscellaneous, her eyes always sliding. Over me, her tone clipped when I asked questions. Paige pushed back whenever she could, usually with a little too much bite. "It's Mom's house, Lila. Maybe let her pick the curtains." Eric would sigh, squeeze my hand, and urge peace. "It's just easier if we all work together." I wanted to believe that. I really did. The hardest part was the confusion. Was I being ungrateful? Was this what aging was supposed to feel like? Some days, I'd walk from room to room, searching for the version of my life I'd built, only to find it boxed up or donated. My memories moved further into the background, replaced by Lila's preferences and Judith's standards. I clung to routines, library books, crossword puzzles, phone calls with old friends. But every day felt more like I was living in someone else's story. It was Paige who noticed the bank statements first. She asked about a missing check, an odd withdrawal. I brushed her off, embarrassed by my own uncertainty. I was still telling myself it was just transition, just practicality. But a quiet fear settled in, a suspicion that things were being decided for me, not with me. Then, a week after Lila repainted the front hall, I stumbled on something that made my blood run cold. I'd been searching for a recipe card in the old secretary desk, a place nobody bothered with anymore. Tucked under a pile of expired coupons, I found a crisp, recent document addressed to my bank. It was a change of address request, filled out in neat handwriting, Lila's, unmistakable. My name, my account number, but Lila's phone number and email listed as the new primary contact. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single electric line of fear. My hands went numb. I stared at the page, my own signature forged in a way that made my heart stutter. It wasn't just redecorating anymore. This was something deeper, something darker. I pressed the document flat against the desk, pulse racing, mind whirring with 1,000 questions and possibilities. How long had this been going on? What else had I missed? I tucked the paper into my pocket, eyes burning with the weight of a new, unwelcome truth. As I closed the desk, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the glass. Older, yes, but not defeated. Not yet. A storm was coming, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I could weather it alone. If there's anything more dangerous than outright hostility, it's the brand of kindness Lila specialized in. The smiling, tireless, calculated generosity that left no room for argument. The world saw her as the ideal daughter-in-law. Polished, tireless, always ready with a gluten-free muffin or a fundraising idea. Even I believed it for a while. It's easy to fall for a performance when the alternative is admitting you're a bit player in your own home. In public, Lila sparkled. The neighbors adored her, and the churchwomen all took her under their wing. I'd watch her flutter through the foyer, bright scarf trailing, voice raised just enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, Dorothy's just the best. She's like a second mother to me." People smiled, and I smiled too, nodding at the familiar script. But when the door closed, the performance shifted. I'd offer to help prep for her charity brunches, just chopping vegetables or folding napkins, but she'd decline with that gentle, icy touch. "No, Dorothy, you should rest. Let us handle it. We want you to feel looked after." Looked after. The phrase tasted off, like milk turned sour in a clean cup. The house filled with the trappings of Lila's causes. Mason jars for kids in need lined the hall table. Lists of donors fluttered on the fridge. I'd offer suggestions, maybe bake sale recipes from the library days, or advice about which neighbor always chipped in big, but she'd barely look up. "That's so sweet, Dorothy, but I already have it all organized. Don't worry about a thing." Sometimes I'd walk in on her giving interviews in the living room, Sophie perched prettily at her side. "We just want to teach her gratitude," Lila would say, one hand resting lightly on Sophie's shoulder. "It's so important to show our kids how to give back." She made it sound like something she'd invented. I'd stand in the kitchen doorway, unseen, listening as the house, my house, became her stage. Eric faded into the background, always just out of reach. I watched him wash dishes, eyes downcast, or disappear to his office as soon as Lila started in about the next event. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands fidgeted with his ring, spinning it back and forth. Sometimes I wanted to shake him, demand he look at me, at himself, but I never did. Conflict made my skin crawl, a lesson pressed into me by my own mother's constant warnings. "Don't start trouble, Dorothy. Men have enough to deal with." Those lessons ran deep, deeper than I like to admit. Lila's confidence, her certainty. At first it made me shrink. I measured myself against her and found myself lacking, as if her energy somehow justified my own erasure. Maybe I was old-fashioned. Maybe I'd brought this on myself by not speaking up sooner. When Lila corrected me about how to set the table or suggested I nap while she handled everything, I started to believe I deserved this smallness. Women like me made room. That's what I'd always been told. Still, something in me bristled. When the house was quiet, I'd remember the years before Lila, how I used to host book club or bake for Sophie's school, how David would pour wine and we'd laugh late into the night. Now the laughter came from the living room without me. I'd hear it in snatches. Lila, Judith, even Paige sometimes, trying to play along. I sat in the kitchen, picking at a plate of food, the clatter of silverware and distant jokes a reminder of the space between us. One Sunday, as Lila set up for her annual spring brunch for literacy, I offered to help arrange the dessert table. She smiled, sweet as anything, but her voice was tight. "You're so lucky to have us take care of everything for you, Dorothy. Not every mother-in-law gets this kind of support." It sounded like a kindness, but underneath it was a warning. I bit my tongue and stepped aside, watching her arrange cake stands and fuss over tea towels, every move calculated to show how indispensable she was. Neighbors arrived, cooing over Lila's new drapes and Dorothy's adorable granddaughter. I drifted from room to room, smiling and nodding, but never quite belonging. Judith presided over it all, offering suggestions and reminders, making it clear Lila was running the show. "You must be so grateful, Dorothy," she said to me once, voice dripping with satisfaction. "Lila has such energy. She really brings out the best in a home." I wanted to ask whose home she meant. Paige watched all of this with a kind of resigned exasperation. "She's good. I'll give her that," Paige muttered as she refilled her drink at the kitchen counter. "She could run for mayor, but she's not fooling me." I wished I had Paige's boldness, her refusal to disappear. Eric seemed to shrink every week, his voice softer, his opinions fewer. He worked later and later, coming home with apologies on his lips and shadows under his eyes. "Lila's just stressed," he'd whisper when I caught him alone. "She just wants everything to be perfect." I'd nod and say I understood, but I didn't. Or maybe I did, too well. My suspicion grew quietly, almost like a secret hobby. I began to notice the way Lila always handled the bills, her insistence that I let go of old habits like managing the grocery list or paying the water bill. When I tried to ask questions, she'd wave them off. "It's easier if I do it, Dorothy. You can just relax." My input, my history, my routines, all gently, efficiently erased. But there were cracks. I found receipts in the trash for things I didn't recognize, expensive meals, home goods I never saw. When I asked Eric, he just mumbled, "Ask Lila." Lila always had a story. A fundraiser, a necessary expense, something for Sophie. The explanations stacked up, thin as paper, flimsy as trust. At night, I lay awake, listening to the house settle around me. I remembered the stories I'd read in the library. Women vanishing into other people's lives, convincing themselves it was easier to just go along. But I wasn't ready to vanish. Not yet. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I found myself at the kitchen table, alone with a plate of leftovers. The laughter from the living room rolled down the hall, muffled but sharp. I stared at the door, feeling every inch of distance between me and the life I used to have. I realized, with a chill, that I was waiting for permission to belong. Lila's voice echoed from the other room, bright and sure. "You're so lucky to have us take care of everything for you." Lucky, that's what they called it. I watched my own reflection in the window, fork poised over cold chicken, and wondered how long I'd be willing to settle for this version of family, a perfect performance on the outside and a silence that pressed tighter every day. But something inside me refused to go quiet, no matter how much I tried to smother it. And in that hush, I began to wonder just how much of myself I was willing to lose for someone else's idea of perfect. Money, I'd always believed, was best handled with care. A lesson from childhood, when my father kept every bill in a locked tin box at the top of his wardrobe, counting out allowances for me and my mother like he was doling out treats to pets. My mother never questioned where the money went or how much she was allowed to spend. If she came home with anything unapproved, a new towel, a pair of shoes, my father's voice would go low and sharp, the conversation ending in silence. I learned early that security was fragile, and trust even more so. It's funny what you carry with you, the old rules running under everything like groundwater. I told myself I was wiser, more independent. I'd managed our family's budget for 30 years, stretching every dollar through David's layoffs, Eric's college, Paige's braces, and even Lila's first baby shower. But now, somehow, I'd lost the thread, and I barely noticed it slipping away. It started with little things. Lila suggested we pool resources, just until we get our feet under us. She kept her voice light, her smile sunny, tapping her laptop with perfectly manicured nails as she sorted bank statements and receipts. "It's just easier this way, Dorothy. I know all the online systems, and you have enough on your plate." Eric would hover in the doorway, avoiding my eyes, his agreement silent but firm. Soon I found my checkbook living on the dining room table, next to Lila's folders and budgeting apps. She'd leave sticky notes. Paid, or for groceries, but the numbers didn't add up. I tried to reconcile the accounts myself late at night, but passwords had changed, statements went paperless, and every attempt to ask was met with a wall of cheerful efficiency. "I promise, Dorothy, everything's in order. We're all in this together." But every month, my extra seemed to shrink. A forgotten utility bill, a surprise repair, a field trip for Sophie. I tried to keep track, jotting notes in my old ledger, but the balances fell faster than I could make sense of them. Paige came by more often now, her eyes sharp, mouth tight. She watched Lila with open suspicion, refusing her offers of coffee or scones. One afternoon, as Lila clicked away at her laptop and Eric pretended to watch TV, Paige leaned in close. "Mom, are you sure you know what's really going on here?" she whispered. "I saw the check you gave Eric for the water bill, but Lila just paid it online from her card." I brushed her off. "Maybe they just want to be efficient. It's a new world, Paige. People handle things differently now." She wasn't convinced. "Or maybe they want control." Her words landed harder than I let on. Later, Paige cornered Eric in the driveway, demanding answers. I watched from the window as they argued, Paige's hands slicing the air, Eric standing still, head bowed, voice lost in the wind. He came inside afterward, his face red, his words clipped. "You know Lila's just trying to help, Mom. We all want what's best." But best for whom? That question lodged in my mind, stubborn as a splinter. The tension between Paige and Eric grew more obvious. Holiday dinners became battlegrounds, Paige sniping at Lila's budget talk, Eric shrinking further from every confrontation. I hated the conflict, hated the feeling that I'd failed as a mother, unable to keep peace even in my own home. The past crept in at odd moments. I'd hear my father's voice and Eric's half-hearted reassurances, my mother's weary sighs and my own. There were times when I'd catch myself apologizing for asking about my own bank account or hesitating before spending on a new coat. I wondered if I'd ever really outgrown the lessons of my childhood, or if I was just wearing them under a different name. Still, suspicion gnawed at me. Late at night, I'd wait until the house was quiet. Eric's snores, Sophie's gentle breathing, Lila's footsteps fading to the far end of the hall. I'd slip into the laundry room, where I'd hidden a battered cash box behind the detergent bottles. It wasn't much, maybe a few $100s, emergency money I'd tucked away for years. Each time there was less than I remembered. My hands shook as I counted it, fear prickling up my spine. Was I losing my memory? Or was something being taken without my knowing? Lila seemed to notice my unease. She became even more attentive, bringing me tea, insisting on joining me for errands. Always so helpful. When I tried to mention the missing cash or the confusing bills, she'd smile and pat my hand. "You really don't need to worry, Dorothy. Let us handle it. It's for everyone's good." But good for whom? The question haunted me. One Friday, Paige arrived unannounced, frustration evident. She set her purse down hard on the table. "Something's not right, Mom," she said, barely bothering with greetings. "I asked Lila for last month's utility receipts and she gave me 3 different stories." Eric came into the kitchen, stiff as a board. "Paige, let it go. Lila's got it covered." Paige shot him a look. "You're just going to let her run everything? You don't think Mom deserves to know where her money is going?" Eric shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "It's not like that." Lila entered, bright and breezy. "Hey, everyone. I made muffins. Paige, you'll love the blueberry." Paige ignored her. "I want to see the statements, Lila. Mom's not just a guest in her own house." Lila's smile flickered. "Of course, Paige. I'll email them tonight. I have nothing to hide." That night, Paige sat on my bed, flipping through old bank emails I'd managed to recover from the spam folder. "Something's off, Mom. I swear. You're missing at least $500 a month minimum." I shrugged, helpless. "What can I do, Paige? I'm not good with computers. Every time I ask, they just make me feel old and silly." Paige's face softened. She reached over, squeezing my hand. "You're not silly, Mom, and you're not alone." Later that week, Paige texted me at midnight, breathless and urgent. I checked the statements. Lila's been wiring money out every month. Not to Eric, not to any bill. An account I've never heard of. Different name, different city. The shock hit like cold water. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The old house creaked around me, every shadow suddenly suspicious. I slipped into the kitchen, flashlight in hand, and checked my cash box again. Even less than last time. My mind raced. What else had Lila been hiding? What else had I lost without even realizing? As dawn broke, I stared out the kitchen window at the thinning light, the world outside barely waking. I realized how deeply I'd let old habits, silence, obedience, deference shape my life, my choices, my family. I saw Lila at the kitchen table, typing away, the checkbook open beside her, Eric's gaze fixed firmly on the floor. And for the first time I wondered if I could afford not just the money, but the cost of my own silence. Because the real price, I was starting to understand, went far deeper than dollars and cents. Family dinners were once simple affairs. Sunday roasts, mismatched plates, laughter echoing off the walls, the little squabbles that never lasted beyond dessert. But now, sitting at the head of my own table, I felt more like a guest than a host, the air charged and brittle, ready to snap. It started, as these things often did, with something small, a comment about groceries. Lila placed a casserole on the table, her movements precise, her smile fixed in place. She reached for the salad, then paused, looking at me with a hint of theatrical concern. "Dorothy, I noticed the grocery bill was a bit high again this week. I know it's easy to lose track, but with all of us living here, we have to be more careful." The words landed hard. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Paige set down her knife with a deliberate clatter, eyes narrowing. Eric kept his gaze on his plate, shoulders hunched. I could feel the flush creeping up my neck, embarrassment blooming in front of my own family. I stammered, I picked up a few things for Sophie's lunches, and the dog needed food." Lila cut me off, voice sweet but firm. I understand, Dorothy, but it all adds up. We're on a tight budget, remember? We just want to be sure everyone's doing their part. Judith, perched elegantly at the far end, sipped her wine and chimed in. Lila's right, dear. In times like these, it's important to have one person in charge of the finances. Otherwise, it's just chaos. I used to run a tight ship when Lila was growing up. I watched the faces around the table. Paige's simmering anger, Eric's silent retreat, Sophie's anxious glances between adults. The walls felt closer than ever. The warmth leached from the room. Lila continued, I'm only saying this because I care, Dorothy. It's easy to get confused with so much to manage. Maybe you could let me handle all the shopping from now on. That way, nothing gets missed. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the scrape of Paige's chair as she pushed back, fixing Lila with a glare. Since when did you become the boss around here? Lila blinked, feigning surprise. I'm not trying to be the boss, Paige. I'm just trying to keep things running smoothly. I assumed everyone wanted what's best. Paige shot back. Funny, because it seems like what you want is control. Eric's voice was barely a whisper. Paige, let's not... But Paige didn't back down. Mom's been running this house her whole life. She knows how to buy groceries. She doesn't need to ask permission to spend her own money. Judith's voice was chilly. Paige, darling, there's no need for drama. Lila is simply being practical. The words hit me in a way I couldn't shake. Practical, careful, responsible. I'd spent my life trying to be those things. David used to say, Dorothy, never cause trouble. People remember a peacemaker, not a fighter. His voice echoed in my head as if he were sitting at the table now, watching me weigh every word. I looked at Eric, searching for support, but he just stared at his food, twisting his napkin in his lap. I thought of all the times David and I sat at this same table, talking through problems quietly, always with an eye toward keeping the family together. He never liked arguments. He would tell me, You have a good heart, Dot. Don't let it get hardened by other people's noise. But now, the noise was deafening, and I couldn't find my own voice in it. Paige's eyes flashed. I don't think this is about groceries, Lila. I think you just like telling people what to do. Lila's smile thinned. If you have a problem, Paige, maybe you should contribute more. It's not easy carrying all the responsibility. Paige stood up, fists clenched. That's rich. You think you're the only one who works around here? Or maybe you just like having Mom to push around because she doesn't fight back. The room was suddenly too small, the air heavy. Judith dabbed her mouth with a napkin, shaking her head. Enough, girls. This is exactly why Lila has to step up. Someone needs to be the adult. Eric finally looked up, his voice pleading. Can we just eat, please? We don't have to fight? The silence stretched, punctuated only by Sophie's quiet sniffles. I wanted to comfort her, but my own hands felt too heavy, too empty. A memory flashed, me at 16, watching my mother fold towels in silence as my father raged about money. She never spoke up, never contradicted him, just pressed her lips together and smoothed the fabric. I remembered hating her for that silence, vowing I'd never be so passive. But here I was, decades later, caught between the need for peace and the urge to speak. I tried to gather my composure. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Lila, but I don't want to be cut out of decisions. I can manage the shopping. Lila's response was swift, practiced. Of course, Dorothy. I just think it would be easier for everyone if I took care of it. You have enough to worry about. The dismissal stung more than I cared to admit. Paige sat down, her jaw tight. You don't get to decide what Mom can handle. Judith interjected. Paige, you're being disrespectful. Paige laughed bitterly. And you're being a bully. Eric sighed, a long, defeated sound. Please, let's just stop. Can't we have one dinner without all this? No one answered. We finished the meal in silence, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. After dinner, I found myself in the kitchen, rinsing dishes with shaking hands. Paige leaned against the counter. You don't have to let her walk all over you, Mom. I managed a weak smile. It's just easier sometimes, Paige. I don't want to make things worse. She shook her head. Easier for who? I didn't answer. I thought again of David's advice, never cause trouble, and wondered when keeping the peace had started costing me so much. Later, alone in my room, I replayed the argument in my mind. My heart ached with regret. Regret for not speaking up. Regret for letting things go so far. I stared at the ceiling. David's words chasing themselves in circles. Never cause trouble. But maybe, I thought, trouble is exactly what's needed when the cracks in the foundation threaten to bring the whole house down. By the first week of March, my nerves were stretched thin. Sleep came in fits. I'd wake to the creak of the house and the distant hum of the refrigerator, the darkness pressing close. In that hush, old anxieties returned, whispering warnings I could no longer ignore. It was Paige who finally said what I was too afraid to think. "Mom, you need to go to the bank. You need to see everything for yourself." On a Tuesday morning, I bundled up against the cold coat buttoned high, purse tucked under my arm like a secret. The air was sharp, biting my cheeks as I walked to the corner bus stop. Every step felt heavier than the last. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting Lila's voice to call me back inside, but the house remained still, blinds drawn tight. At the bank, I stood in line, heart thudding, hands wrapped tight around my purse. The line was long, retirees and parents with toddlers, teenagers checking balances, everyone living their own small dramas. My mind raced, replaying every warning, every moment I'd hesitated. Paige's words echoed, "You deserve to know the truth." Finally, it was my turn. I slid my ID and account number across the counter to the teller, a young woman with kind eyes and chipped nail polish. "I'd like to see my recent transactions." "All of them," I said, voice trembling. She printed the statements, the paper warm in my cold hands. I moved to a bench by the window, sunlight glancing off the glass, and unfolded the sheets. The numbers didn't lie. Again and again, there were large withdrawals, transfers I'd never made, checks I hadn't written, payments to names I didn't recognize. The pit in my stomach grew deeper as I flipped page after page. 1,000 here, 500 there. My savings, so carefully guarded, bleeding out month by month. My vision blurred. The world outside went distant, voices muffled. I saw my father's old tin box, my mother's resigned silence. I remembered the vow I'd made, to never be blind to my own life. I left the bank with a fistful of evidence, the cold even sharper on my walk home. I called Paige from the sidewalk, my voice shaking. "You were right, she's been taking money for months. I don't know how I let this happen." Paige's voice was strong, urgent. "Come stay with me, Mom. We'll figure this out together. You don't have to go back there." But I did go back. I couldn't just walk away, not yet. I needed to see Eric. I needed answers. The house felt colder than the street. I found Eric in the living room, his face pale, hair rumpled. He looked up from his phone as I came in, eyes searching mine. Without a word, I handed him the papers. He read quickly, face draining of color, lips pressed to a hard line. I saw his hands shake, first with disbelief, then with shame. "How could she?" he whispered. "Why didn't I see this?" I kept my voice even. "I think you know, Eric. You just didn't want to admit it." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have seen this sooner." Upstairs, voices rose. Lila and Paige. I heard the thud of footsteps, the sharp crack of Paige's anger. "What have you been doing with Mom's money? Who are you sending it to?" Lila's response was muffled, but defensive. "It's not what you think. You don't understand. This is about the family, about opportunity. You can't just... You're overreacting, Paige." Eric pushed past me, climbing the stairs 2 at a time. The argument exploded. Voices, accusations, the sound of something shattering. Sophie's small cries added another note of panic to the chaos. I stood in the hallway, purse clutched tight, the evidence of my own erasure pressed against my side. My mind spun with memories of this house, birthdays, laughter, quiet nights with David by the fire. Could I really leave it behind? Was this what it took to finally stand up for myself? Paige found me in the doorway, voice gentler now. "Mom, you can't stay here. Not after this. Please come with me. We'll call the bank, the police, whoever you need. You don't have to fight alone." I hesitated, torn between fury and grief. My home was no longer a sanctuary, but the place of my greatest humiliation. I looked around, the framed photos, the chipped mugs, the faded curtains. Could I really walk out? As I weighed my choices, a new sound caught my attention. Lila on the phone in the upstairs hallway. I stood very still, listening as her voice floated down the stairs, low and urgent. "Yes, I know. She's going to leave. It's just a matter of time. When she does, we'll have room for the new opportunity. Don't worry, I'll make sure she signs everything first. My blood ran cold. A new, sharper fear took hold. This wasn't just about money. Lila had plans, plans that didn't include me. I slipped quietly to my room, heart pounding, feeling the shape of a decision crystallize in my chest. The last thing I heard was Eric's voice, breaking, desperate. Lila, what are you talking about? Who were you on the phone with? No answer. Just silence. The final, echoing warning that the only thing left to lose was myself. The house had never felt smaller. After the confrontation at the bank, Lila changed tactics, abandoning her veneer of kindness for something colder, sharper. She became watchful, measuring my every move, every word, waiting for an opportunity to twist them to her advantage. It started with small things: a missing set of keys, bills suddenly unpaid, a glass of water spilled and forgotten on the counter. Dorothy, you really ought to write things down, Lila would say, her tone gentle enough to sound helpful, but loud enough for Eric and Sophie to overhear. You're not as young as you used to be. We're all worried you might forget something important. The suggestion took root. Eric began asking more questions. Did I remember to take my pills? Was I eating enough? Had I really meant to move that money from my account? Each question stung, pried open old insecurities. I heard my mother's voice, the tremor in her hands as she aged, the way my father would talk over her at family gatherings. You know how she gets. She means well, but she's not always all there. I had spent my life running from that fate. Now, suddenly, I felt it closing in. Lila's accusations escalated quickly. She started keeping notes on my mistakes, compiling a file. Missed appointments, confused statements, repeated questions about the bills. One evening, I overheard her talking quietly to Judith in the dining room, her voice careful and clinical. I think Dorothy's declining. She's getting confused about money, about the house. For her own safety, we might need to consider next steps. Eric agrees. It's only a matter of time. I wanted to burst in and scream, but the words died in my throat. I watched through a crack in the door as Lila fed receipts and old mail into the shredder, eyes narrowed, jaw set. She was rewriting the story, my story, one scrap at a time. Eric grew distant, torn between the woman he loved and the mother who raised him. When he did speak to me, it was with a note of forced cheer, as if afraid I might shatter if pressed too hard. It's just stress, Mom. Things are changing. Lila's only trying to help. Maybe Paige should come around less. She just stirs things up. I bit back my anger, my heartbreak. I wanted to shake him, to make him remember the years I'd worked late so he could play soccer, the birthday cakes I'd baked from scratch, the long nights I'd spent at David's bedside while Eric did his homework in the corner. Every sacrifice I'd made came rushing back, hot and useless, proof only of how easy it was to be erased. Paige, always the fighter, refused to let it go. She started digging, calling old friends, sifting through public records, reading late into the night. She came to me one afternoon, her face pale but determined. You're not crazy, Mom. She wants you out for a reason. I found something. She pushed a folder across the table, printouts of old court records, newspaper clippings, a blurry mugshot of Lila with a different last name, charges, fraud, embezzlement, dropped years ago but not erased. I stared at the photos, my stomach twisting. How had we let this woman into our lives, our home? That's why she wants you out, Paige whispered. She's done this before, Mom. She gets close, takes control, bleeds people dry. She doesn't care about family. She cares about what she can get. I pressed the folder to my chest, tears burning behind my eyes. How could Eric not see this? How had I missed it, blinded by my own longing for peace, my fear of being alone? That night I woke to the whir of the shredder, the glow of the dining room lamp. I crept to the door and watched Lila feed stacks of documents, my bank statements, old tax returns into the machine. She moved quickly, methodically, destroying every trace of the life I'd built. Paige found me the next morning at the kitchen table, clutching a half-empty mug of tea, eyes gritty from lack of sleep. She sat beside me, her hand covering mine. We need to act, Mom, before she tries to have you declared unfit. She's building a case. You have to fight back. Fight back. The words sounded foreign in my mouth. heavy with the weight of decades spent making room for others, smoothing the way, sacrificing my own comfort for Eric's happiness, for David's peace. But now I saw the price. A slow, painful erasure. A life narrowed to whatever space someone else decided I was allowed to occupy. Eric watched all this from the sidelines, guilt radiating from every line of his body. He avoided my gaze, afraid of what he might find in it. When I asked him one last time to believe me, to stand up for me, he only shook his head. "I just want everyone to be okay, Mom. I don't know what to do anymore." I wanted to scream, to tell him the truth. There is no such thing as okay when someone else is writing your story. Instead, I looked at Paige, her jaw set, her eyes bright with defiance, and I felt a spark of the courage I thought I'd lost. I would not go quietly. Not this time. And for the first time, I wondered if sacrifice, in the end, was just another word for surrender. The living room had never felt so formal. Sunlight struggled through the curtains, striping the floor with pale gold. But the warmth didn't touch any of us. Lila had called a family meeting, and from the moment I walked in, I knew she'd planned everything to the last detail. The furniture had been rearranged, sofa and chairs drawn up in a semicircle, leaving me in the center, an island beneath their gaze. Eric sat rigidly at Lila's side, his eyes on the rug, jaw tense. Sophie and Judith hovered near the mantel, both wide-eyed, wary. Lila stood, crisp blouse immaculate, folder in hand, every inch the perfect hostess turned prosecuting attorney. "I know this is hard, Dorothy," she began, voice soft but steely. "But after everything that's happened, we all need some security. There have been mistakes. We need to protect the family." She placed a stack of papers, too thick to be simple, on the coffee table. "I've spoken to a lawyer. If you sign these, I can help take care of everything. Bills, medical appointments, property taxes. You don't have to worry anymore." Paige was late, still at work, but I knew she'd race over if she could. My hands trembled as I looked down at the top sheet. Power of attorney. My name, neat and vulnerable, beneath paragraphs of legalese. Eric looked up at last. "Mom, it's just a precaution. You know, with everything going on, it might be easier." "Easier for who?" Paige's voice rang out from the hallway, sharp as a slap. She strode in, hair wild from the wind, a bulging manila envelope clutched to her chest. Lila's composure slipped for just a second, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "Paige, this isn't the time." Paige threw the envelope onto the coffee table, the contents spilling out in a messy pile. Bank printouts, receipts, photocopies, screenshots, evidence, all of it. "You want to talk about security? About protecting Mom? Let's talk about these secret transfers. The accounts in your maiden name, the wire to Philadelphia. You've been stealing from her since the day you moved in." Judith gasped. Eric recoiled, as if the words themselves had teeth. Sophie started to cry, the sound muffled by Judith's shoulder. Lila scooped up the papers, her smile tightening into something brittle. "You're all just jealous of what we've built. You never wanted me here. You resent that I made this housework, that I fixed what you couldn't." Paige wouldn't let go. She stepped closer, finger pointed. "You're a fraud, Lila. I found your record. I know what you did in Connecticut. You don't get to rewrite history here." Lila rolled her eyes, the mask slipping entirely. "Eric, are you really going to let her talk to me like this? After everything I've done for this family? For you?" Eric was frozen, breathing hard, eyes darting between his wife, his sister, and me. I don't know what to believe anymore. Lila, why didn't you tell me about these accounts?" The tension tightened, pulling the room smaller, sharper. My own heart pounded, panic warring with a strange, rising clarity. Lila's gaze found mine, dark and desperate. "Dorothy, you know how much I care about you. You're confused. You've been struggling. This is just to help you. Don't let Paige scare you. You can trust me." Trust. The word sounded hollow, a bell rung once too often. Paige turned to Eric, voice trembling with urgency. "Wake up. You're losing Mom for good if you let this happen. She's not confused. She's scared. And she's right to be." My fingers drifted toward the pen Lila had placed so neatly beside the document. My whole body shook. I thought of the sacrifices, the years of care, the promises I'd made to myself and broken. I thought of my mother's silence, my father's control, my late husband's warnings. Never cause trouble, never stand out. But here I was, in the center of my own life, family circling like jurors, and for once the weight felt different. I looked up and saw Paige's face, fierce with hope, pleading with me to remember myself. Eric's voice broke the moment. "Mom, if you want to sign it, I'll understand, but—" He glanced at Paige. "But maybe you don't have to." Lila bristled. "We're out of time, Dorothy. If you really want to stay safe." Safe. Another lie. My hand hovered over the page. I could feel the pressure, the years of being told what was best for me. I almost signed. The pen hovered, then stilled. I looked at Lila, at the woman I'd trusted and welcomed and doubted. "No," I said, voice barely more than a whisper, then louder. "No, I won't sign. I won't give you that power over me." The silence that followed was seismic. Judith's hand flew to her mouth. Sophie hid behind her grandmother. Eric slumped, relief and sorrow crashing together. Paige smiled, tears in her eyes. Lila's mask finally cracked, her voice cold and low. "You'll regret this, Dorothy." But I felt lighter than I had in months. Before anyone could say another word, there was a knock. At the door. Judith opened it, retrieving an envelope with no return address. "It's for you," she said, handing it over, hands trembling. Inside, a single typed sheet. "Be careful who you trust. Lila has done this before. She's after more than just your money. Ask about the Bennett family trust. Not all secrets died with David." My hands shook as I read, the world tilting beneath me. There was more than money, more than control. My past, my late husband's secrets, Lila's real motivations, all knotted together. Paige leaned close, reading over my shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "What is the Bennett family trust?" I shook my head, old fears and old memories flooding back. There were things David had never told me, things I'd chosen not to ask. But now the truth demanded to be found. The trial wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Everything changed after the family meeting. The lines that had once divided loyalty and suspicion now ran straight through the heart of our home, splitting open old wounds and spilling out secrets that couldn't be contained. For the first time since Lila had entered our lives, her control began to slip. It was subtle at first, a clipped word, a misplaced receipt, a careless glare, but soon the cracks spread, visible to everyone, even Eric. Eric, who for so long had kept his eyes on the floor and his heart locked away, could no longer avoid the truth. I found him one morning in the den, the soft light pooling around him as he sat on the old rug, a pile of torn family photos scattered at his feet. Some were ripped clean down the middle, dividing faces and memories. I watched as he stared at the fragments, his shoulders shaking. He didn't notice me at first, and when he finally looked up, his face was blotchy with tears. "I thought we were building something real," he choked out, voice raw. "I thought I could fix this. I didn't want to see it, Mom. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to believe—" His words trailed off as he wiped his face on his sleeve. I wanted to hold him, tell him it wasn't his fault, but there was a suitcase open on my bed upstairs, half-packed with sweaters, old photo albums, my wedding ring tucked inside a sock. I'd never felt more uncertain of my place in this house, even as the truth began to win ground. Down the hall, Paige's determination only grew sharper. She set up camp at the kitchen table, laptop open, notepad beside her, cell phone glued to her ear. I'd catch snippets of her conversations, names, dates, urgent requests for old records. She dug and dug, the clatter of her fingers on the keys, a steady reminder that someone was still fighting for me. She came to me one afternoon, her voice vibrating with discovery. "Mom, listen, I found Lila's first marriage. It ended suddenly, right after her husband's family inheritance vanished. No one could prove anything. But his sister said Lila handled all their money, just like here. There's more. There are court documents. If we go to the police or a lawyer, you'll have a case." I pressed a hand to my chest. "What about the trust?" David never said much. He always said he was taking care of things for the future. Paige nodded. "I'm working on it. But if there's a trust, Lila can't touch it. Not without your signature. That's why she needs you out." The house felt haunted by Lila's presence, even when she wasn't there. She'd become more volatile, her patience paper thin, her voice quick to rise. Late one night, I heard glass shatter in the kitchen. I crept out of my room, peering down the hall. Lila stood by the sink, one hand gripping a nearly empty wine bottle, the other pressed to her temple. The sound of broken glass echoed as she swept the shards into the drain, swearing under her breath. Sophie found me the next morning, curling up on the edge of my bed with her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tight. She was quiet for a long time, tracing patterns on the comforter with her fingers. "Grandma," she said finally, eyes serious and wide. "Mommy says you're sick. She says you forget things, and that's why you need to leave." My throat tightened. "What do you think, sweetheart?" She looked at me, so earnest, so heartbreakingly young. "I think you're brave. I think you remember all the best things. You remember how to make French toast, and you remember when I lost my tooth in the garden. You always remember the stories." I pulled her close, tears stinging my eyes. "Thank you, Sophie. That means more to me than anything." She snuggled against me, whispering, "Don't go. Or if you have to go, take me with you." That afternoon, as Lila's temper frayed and Judith made herself scarce, I weighed my options in a way I never had before. For the first time, I saw myself not as a burden or a victim, but as someone who still had power, even if I'd forgotten it for too long. I found the folder Paige had put together, reading through every line. Lila's aliases, the marriage records, the missing inheritance, all of it damning. I debated my next move. Call the police? Find a lawyer? Confront Lila with everything and risk her rage? Every option carried risk, but so did doing nothing. The threat to Sophie, to my home, to the last pieces of my independence pressed against me like a hand at my back. Paige's voice from the kitchen, sharp and certain. "We have to act soon, Mom, before she tries something desperate. I'll go with you, whatever you decide." As night fell, the house descended into uneasy silence. Lila stayed out late, returning just before midnight, fumbling with her keys, slamming the door, and leaving another empty glass in the sink. The strain had worn her edges raw. The old confidence was gone, replaced by a frantic, cornered energy. Eric came to me again, hollow-eyed and worn. "I don't know what to do. Mom, I feel like I'm losing everything. My wife, my daughter, you. I should have seen it coming." I touched his hand, forgiving him in that moment, even if he couldn't forgive himself. "You still have a choice, Eric. You always did. We all do." I finished packing my suitcase, heart heavy but steadier. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring: courtrooms, lawyers, custody fights, or something quieter, like simply starting over. But I knew, finally, that the unraveling was not the end. Sometimes when things fall apart, it's only so we can see what was holding them together all along. The house felt like a stage set for disaster. Every lamp throwing stark shadows, every voice on edge. I barely slept the night before, but when morning came, Paige was ready. She had printed out everything: court records, bank statements, lists of transfers, a bullet-pointed chronology of lies, and stacked it in a folder as thick as a novel. "It has to happen today," she said. "No more hiding." Judith was in the kitchen, distractedly arranging flowers, trying to pretend nothing had changed. Eric paced, nerves raw, while Sophie colored quietly at the table. Lila stayed in the bedroom late, silence radiating from behind the closed door. It all came to a head just after noon. Paige called everyone into the living room, voice firm, brooking no argument. Lila hesitated at the threshold, arms crossed tight. Her face was pinched, eyes shadowed with sleeplessness and secrets. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. Paige began, laying the folder on the coffee table with a deliberate finality. "We all know why we're here. Lila, I want you to look at these." She pushed the folder toward her, one damning sheet after another spilling out. Lila's eyes darted over the evidence. Receipts, transfers, signatures, marriage records, each one a nail in the coffin of her lies. She shook her head at first, mouth opening and closing like a fish. "This is all twisted. Paige, you don't understand what you're doing." Eric stood, hands shaking, finally unable to keep quiet. "Lila, just tell the truth, please. We deserve that much." Judith, already weeping, rocked in her chair, voice quivering. "Lila, darling, what have you done?" Lila's composure crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, streaking her carefully applied makeup. She slammed her fists on the table, papers scattering, and sobbed, anguish and fury tangled in every breath. "You never wanted me to belong. Any of you. You made me the villain from the start. I tried so hard to be what you all needed, but it was never enough. Dorothy made me feel small and weak, and I hated it. I just wanted a place, something to call mine. I lost control. The confession hung in the air. For a moment, there was only the sound of her sobbing, Judith's wails, Sophie's soft crying in the corner. Eric knelt beside the couch, head in his hands, shattered by the reality he'd helped hide. Paige simply stared, arms folded, grief and triumph warring in her eyes. I found myself standing in the center of the room, unsure whether to speak or simply collapse. My own feelings warred, anger, relief, deep sorrow for what had been lost. But also, strangely, a welling of empathy. I saw in Lila the scars of her own childhood, the desperate hunger to belong. Yet I could not forgive the cost, not when it had nearly destroyed us all. I stepped forward, voice steady but kind. Lila, I do believe you were hurting. I do. But pain doesn't justify hurting others. You tried to erase me, to erase my choices, my dignity. I can't let that go, not for your sake, not for mine. Paige moved to my side, fiercely protective. Come on, Mom, you're done here. She wrapped her arm around me, guiding me toward the hallway. Judith, broken, tried to reach for Lila, but Lila turned away, shoulders shaking with fresh sobs. Eric didn't move. He seemed stuck to the floor, pale and stunned. We packed a small bag in silence, clothes, medication, my favorite photo of David, Sophie's latest drawing. Paige's house wasn't far, but it felt like a world away, a sanctuary I'd forgotten I might ever need. As we walked out, Eric followed, his face gaunt, eyes rimmed red. Mom, wait, please. I turned, heartbreaking for him. You have to protect Sophie now. You have to be strong, Eric. He hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I knew more than I said. I saw the accounts, the mail. I was scared. Lila, she could be cruel. She made me feel like I'd lose everything if I crossed her. I thought I was protecting you by keeping quiet, but I was protecting myself. His words were a twist of the knife, honest but almost too late. I placed a hand on his cheek as I had when he was a little boy. Fear makes us do small things, Eric, but it's never too late to choose differently. For Sophie, for yourself. He nodded, tears sliding silently. I'll fix it, Mom. I promise. We left the house in silence, the echoes of grief and confession following us out into the pale afternoon. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter, still heavy with loss, but threaded with possibility. I wasn't going to be erased, not anymore. Healing did not arrive all at once. In those first weeks at Paige's house, I moved through the days as if wading through water, heavy, slow, uncertain if I would ever reach the shore. The silence was different now, no longer menacing, but unfamiliar. There were mornings I woke from tangled dreams, uncertain of where I was, startled by the quiet comfort of Paige making coffee in the kitchen, Sophie humming as she colored at the breakfast table. Therapy was Paige's idea, and at first I resisted. I had always been the caretaker, the strong one, the one who swallowed grief and soldiered on. But the pain in my chest, the ache that wouldn't leave, convinced me to try. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Archer, listened as I haltingly traced the lines of my family's history. My mother's silence, my father's control, my own years of bending, placating, keeping peace at all costs. Trauma travels through families until someone is ready to feel it, speak it, and heal it, Dr. Archer told me during one session. I wrote the words in my journal, underlining them again and again until the page was soft and worn. I let myself remember all the times I'd chosen silence over conflict, all the ways that silence had shaped not only my life, but Eric's, and Paige's too. Most afternoons, I sat by the window, journal in my lap, watching the neighborhood children play under the wide maple trees. Sophie joined me, her crayons scattered, filling the margins of my pages with wildflowers, smiling suns, and tiny birds. Sometimes she'd curl against my side, her warmth anchoring me to the present. You know what? She said one day, not looking up from her drawing. You're the best grandma in the world. You're brave, even when you're scared. It undid me, that small certainty. I smiled, letting myself feel the pride, the love, the possibility of forgiveness. Not for others, but for myself. Rebuilding with Paige came more naturally than I expected. She was patient, gentle, letting me set the pace. We fell into an easy rhythm, cooking together, sharing books, sometimes arguing about nothing just for the fun of it. In the evenings, we'd walk to the corner store for ice cream, laughing at old memories, daring to hope for new ones. Eric called every few days, his voice tentative but sincere. "How are you, Mom? Is Sophie all right?" The guilt had not left him, but neither had the love. In time, we spoke more honestly about fear, about what we'd lost, and about what might still be possible. "I'm so sorry," he said once, voice thick. "I should have protected you. I should have protected Sophie." "We protect each other now," I told him, and I meant it. Lila's world unraveled as quickly as she had tried to bind mine. The authorities took over, and the evidence Paige collected led to charges. Judith, her pride in tatters, moved out of state, her goodbye to Sophie curt and unfinished. I felt a pang for them both. A sadness that anyone could be so lost, so desperate for belonging that they would destroy everything in their path. The days stretched and filled with newness. I joined a book club at the library, old skills and old friendships reawakening. I planned trips with Paige, small adventures, day hikes, the possibility of seeing the ocean for the first time in decades. I bought myself a new journal, promising to fill it not with regret, but with dreams and little victories. One afternoon, sitting in the garden with Paige, the sun warm and the air sweet with lilac, she turned to me, eyes bright. "You didn't just save yourself, Mom. You broke the cycle. That took real courage." I thought about everything it cost, the years lost, the pain endured, the love almost buried, and I knew she was right. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I caught myself laughing, a deep, bright sound that startled me, then filled me with hope. It had been years since I'd felt such lightness, years since laughter had felt real, unshadowed by fear. I was not finished with healing. But for the first time, I believed I could rise, not just from what had broken me, but towards something new, something of my own making. By late summer, my new apartment felt nothing like exile. I had chosen it myself. Small but bright, with wide windows that caught the morning light, a kitchen that smelled of fresh coffee, and a little patch of garden just outside the back door. I learned the rhythms of this place: early bird song, the laughter of children on the sidewalk, the distant clink of silverware from neighboring kitchens in the evening. For the first time in a long while, my life was entirely, blessedly my own. I filled my days with things I had long denied myself. I volunteered at the library, rejoining a world I'd thought had left me behind. I met friends for lunch at a nearby cafe, sharing stories and slices of pie, letting their laughter knit me into something new. The book club became a weekly sanctuary, a circle of women who spoke honestly, sometimes fiercely, about heartbreak and hope and second chances. I found myself speaking too, my voice steadier with every week. My garden became a kind of altar, a place for quiet reflection, but also for celebration. I planted marigolds and tomatoes, herbs in clay pots. Sophie painted stepping stones for me, each one bright and wild with color. On cool mornings, I would sit outside with a book and a mug of tea, sunlight dancing across the page, the hush broken only by the flutter of wings and sometimes by my own laughter. It was on one of those mornings, just as the world was beginning to warm, that I heard the knock on my door. When I opened it, I found Eric and Sophie standing on the step, uncertainty and hope mingling in their faces. Eric carried a bouquet of sunflowers, an apology in every yellow petal. Sophie held my hand, squeezing it tight. "We wanted to see you," Eric said softly, searching my face for anger or forgiveness. "I know I hurt you, Mom. I don't know if you can ever really forgive me, but I want to try to make things right. For Sophie, for you, for all of us." I looked at him, the little boy he'd been, the man trying to find his way back to himself. "Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through just once," I said, voice gentle. "It's something you choose again and again with every step you take together." We talked for a long time that morning, about what we'd lost and what we might still recover. Sophie curled in my lap, her hair sweet against my cheek. I told her stories, and she drew pictures on the back of old envelopes, her love so simple, so sure. Eric helped me water the garden, his movements careful, as if every gesture might be a kind of prayer. That weekend, Paige invited us all to her house for a barbecue, a gathering I had not dared to hope for during those dark winter days. She grilled corn and burgers in the backyard, music playing softly, the scent of lilac and smoke twining through the air. Sophie chased butterflies with her cousins, her laughter ringing bright as wind chimes. At one point, I found myself standing by the fence, watching Paige tend the grill. She caught my eye, smiling with that familiar mix of pride and mischief. "You did it, Mom. You didn't just survive, you changed everything, for all of us." I shook my head, smiling. "Not just me, we did it together." As dusk settled, we gathered at the picnic table. Eric, Paige, the kids, and me. We toasted with lemonade and told stories, not all of them easy, but each one a testament to what we'd endured. The shadows grew longer, the world softened around the edges, and I realized that this too was a family, chosen, mended, remade by love and by choice. That night, as I walked Sophie and Eric to the door, Eric paused, squeezing my hand. "Thank you, Mom, for giving us another chance, for being strong when I couldn't be." I hugged him close, letting the old ache soften. Family isn't just blood, Eric. It's the people who stay when the storm comes, the ones who fight for you, even when you can't fight for yourself. When everyone had gone, I sat in my garden, the air cool and sweet. I opened a new book, my favorite mug beside me, a blanket around my shoulders. I felt the peace settle in, not because the pain had vanished, but because I had chosen not to let it define me anymore. I thought of Lila, far away now, and of Judith, of all the brokenness and longing that had threatened to pull us under. I thought of my mother, my father, the lessons I had carried, and the ones I was still learning. I thought above all of Sophie's certainty, that I was brave, even when I was scared. I smiled, letting the story of my life settle in around me, no longer something to run from, but something to honor. I belonged to myself now, and to the family I had chosen, and that was enough. The sun slipped lower, painting the garden gold. My laughter echoed, light and free, and as I turned the page, I knew at last I was at peace. With my story, with my worth, with the family I had fought to keep and the new one I had made. What would you do if the people closest to you threatened everything you built? If Dorothy's story made you question the lines between love and loyalty, imagine what truths might be hidden in your own family. Ready for more real stories that challenge, shock, and heal? Stay with us, because the next secret might change everything you thought you knew.